The broken market, the Nexus Station's lower levels, reeked of desperation and failed dreams. Captain Jake Morrison pulled his worn jacket tighter as he navigated through the maze of makeshift stalls and flickering neon signs. The artificial gravity here was weaker, making each step feel oddly light, as if the station itself was trying to let him float away from this place. He wasn't supposed to be here. A human captain of his reputation should have been dealing with legitimate cargo brokers in the upper sectors, not prowling through the black market levels, where species from across the galaxy came to trade in things that decent beings preferred. Not to think about, but his ship needed parts, and his credits were running low. The war with the Dominion had left many independent traders like him scrambling for work, taking jobs that paid in scraps and hoping to survive another day. Jake paused at a corner where the crowd thinned. The voices here were different, speaking in the harsh clicks and growls of the Korthax trade language. These weren't the desperate human refugees or the opportunistic Xantari merchants from the upper levels. These were the real dealers, the ones who trafficked in living beings. A commotion caught his attention. 3 Korthax were arguing over a shipping container, their insectoid limbs gesticulating wildly. One of them, his carapace scarred and dulled, with age, was gesturing dismissively at something inside the container. Jake edged closer, his translator implant working to decode their rapid speech. What he heard made his stomach turn. Defective breeding stock, the scarred one was saying. Refuses to respond to conditioning protocols. The hegemony marked her for disposal, but I thought she might have some value. Wrong again. You paid 3 units of processed algae for damaged goods. Another replied with what sounded like laughter. Even the pleasure houses won't take something that broken. Cut your losses, Vextar. Jake found himself moving closer, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and growing anger. Through a gap in the container's side, he caught a glimpse of what they were discussing. She was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and her hair was white as starlight. She sat huddled in the corner of the container, wearing nothing but a torn piece of fabric. What struck Jake wasn't her alien beauty, but the way she held herself, as if trying to become invisible. Around her neck was a metal collar, and Jake could see similar restraints on her wrists. But it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They held a depth of intelligence and pain that spoke of someone who understood exactly what was happening to her. The Korthax, named Vextar, noticed Jake's interest. Human, he clicked. You want to make offer? I take anything at this point. 3 algae units, 2, even 1. Just want this mistake gone. Jake felt something burning in his chest, a familiar anger that had gotten him in trouble more times than he could count. What's wrong with her? Won't breed, won't submit, won't even cry properly when disciplined. Useless for any standard applications. The neural conditioning bounced right off her like she had some kind of mental shielding, probably brain damaged. The girl in the container looked up at Jake then, and their eyes met. He saw no pleading there, no hope, but also no surrender. She was waiting, he realized. Still waiting for something, even after everything that had been done to her. I'll give you 50 credits, Jake heard himself say. The price of dignity. Vextars. Compound eyes widened with what Jake assumed was surprise. 50 credits? For this defective unit? Human, you either very stupid or very desperate. Maybe both, Jake replied, keeping his voice steady. But 50 credits is better than the nothing you'll get from anyone else. The other Korthax chittered. Among themselves. Jake could tell they thought he was being played for a fool. Let them think that. He'd been called worse things by better people. You understand what you're buying? Vextar asked, his tone suggesting he was dealing with an idiot. This one broken. No good for work. No good for pleasure. No good for breeding. What human want with useless Zephyrian female? So she was Zephyrian. Jake had heard of them, a species known for their psychic abilities and their devastating beauty. They'd been conquered by the hegemony decades ago, their homeworld stripped of resources, and their people sold into various forms of slavery across the galaxy. "That's my business," Jake said, pulling out his credit chip. 50 credits, and you throw in whatever documentation you have. The negotiation was quick and brutal. Jake transferred the credits, received a datapad with the girl's ownership papers, and watched as Vextaris associates roughly dragged her from the container. She didn't resist, didn't cry out, just moved with the mechanical compliance of someone who had learned that fighting only made things worse. Up close, Jake could see the extent of what had been done to her. The collar around her neck was designed to deliver neural shocks. The restraints on her wrists had chafed her skin raw. She was thin, too thin, and there were healing marks on her arms that spoke of medical procedures he didn't want to think about. "Her designation is ZX2247, Vextar said, handing over the datapad. "Real name unknown. Captured from Zephyr Prime 7 cycles ago. Processed through 3 different conditioning facilities. Current status: failed merchandise." Jake looked at the girl, who was standing motionless beside him now, her head down, her long white hair falling like a curtain to hide her face. "What's your name?" he asked softly. She didn't respond. Jake wasn't sure if she could understand him or if she was simply too broken to care. "She doesn't speak," Vextar said with obvious contempt. "Vocal cords intact, but psychological damage too severe. Like I said, defective." Jake felt that burning anger again, but he kept it contained. Getting into a fight here would help no one, least of all the girl who was now, technically, his responsibility. "Come on," he said to her, keeping his voice gentle. "Let's get out of here." To his surprise, she looked up at him then. Her eyes were a pale blue, almost silver, and they studied his face with an intelligence that contradicted everything Vextar had said about brain damage. She was evaluating him, Jake realized, trying to figure out what kind of monster she'd been sold to this time. Jake extended his hand, not to grab her, but as an invitation. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I promise." She stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, placed her fingers against his palm. Her skin was warm, and Jake could feel a slight tremor running through her. Fear, he thought, or maybe just exhaustion. They walked through the station's corridors in silence, Jake leading the way to the docking bay where his ship waited. The girl, the woman, followed a half-step behind him, her bare feet silent on the metal deck plates. Jake noticed other beings staring at them as they passed, some with curiosity, others with the predatory interest of those who saw potential. Profit. He quickened his pace, suddenly anxious to get her somewhere safe. His ship, the Wanderer, was old and patched and barely spaceworthy, but it was his, and it was clean, and it was a place where no one could hurt her. At least, that's what he told himself as they walked through the airlock and into the ship's cramped interior. The girl, ZX2247, stood in the middle of his small common area, looking around with those intelligent eyes, still trying to figure out what was going to happen to her next. Jake sealed the airlock behind them and turned to face her. "You're safe now," he said, though he wasn't sure she believed him. Hell, he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Breaking chains, the first thing Jake did was show her to the small cabin that served as his guest quarters. It wasn't much, just a narrow bunk, a small storage locker, and a tiny washroom. But it was clean, and it had a door that locked from the inside. "This is yours," he said, gesturing around the space. "The lock works, and I'm the only other person on this ship. You can stay in here as long as you want." She stood in the doorway, looking around the small space with something that might have been wonder. Jake realized that this cramped little cabin might be the first private space she'd had in years. "The washroom has hot water," he continued, feeling awkward under her silent scrutiny. "And there are some clean clothes in the locker. They'll be too big, but they're better than—" He gestured at the torn fabric she was wearing. She touched the wall beside the door, her fingers tracing the smooth metal surface. Then she looked at him again, and Jake saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. It was gratitude, but also confusion, as if kindness was a concept she'd forgotten existed. "I'm Jake," he said, then immediately felt stupid. What was the point of introducing himself to someone who might not even understand him? But then she spoke, her voice so soft he almost missed it. "Nira." Jake felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth. "Nira, that's a beautiful name." She touched her throat, where the collar still rested against her pale skin. Jake's expression hardened. "We need to get that thing off you." The collar was more sophisticated than Jake had initially thought. It wasn't just a restraint device. It was a complete control system, designed to monitor and regulate everything from her heart rate to her brain activity. The neural shock feature was just one of its many functions. Jake spent the better part of an hour in his workshop, carefully analyzing the collar's design. It was hegemony technology, built to be tamper-proof, but Jake had spent years dealing with salvage tech from across the galaxy. Everything had a weakness if you knew where to look. When he returned to Nira's cabin, he found her sitting on the edge of the bunk, wearing the clothes he'd left for her. The pants were rolled up at the cuffs, and the shirt hung loose on her thin frame, but she looked more human somehow, more real. "I think I can remove the collar," Jake said, holding up the tools he'd gathered. "But I need to be careful. If I make a mistake, it could hurt you." Nira looked at the tools in his hands, then at his face. She nodded slowly. "You trust me?" Jake asked, surprised. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke in that same soft voice. "You bought me, but you gave me a room with a lock. You could have taken what you wanted, but you didn't. Either you are very patient, or you are different." "I'm different," Jake said, settling down beside her on the bunk. "I'm not going to hurt you, Nira. Not ever." The process of removing the collar was delicate work. Jake had to disable each of the device's safety systems in sequence, all while monitoring Nira's vital signs to make sure the collar wasn't trying to punish her for the tampering. She sat perfectly still throughout the procedure, barely breathing, her eyes closed in concentration. When the collar finally clicked open and fell away from her neck, Nira gasped and brought her hands up to touch the bare skin where it had rested. There was a band of pale, irritated flesh where the metal had chafed, but Jake could see it was already beginning to heal. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "It's gone," Jake confirmed, tossing the collar into his recycling bin with satisfaction. "And the restraints, too, if you want." Nira held out her wrists without hesitation. The cuffs came off easier than the collar, and Jake noticed that she immediately began rubbing her wrists, as if trying to restore circulation to her hands. "There," Jake said, gathering up the removed restraints. "No more chains." Nira looked at him with those pale blue eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, Jake saw tears gathering there. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you helping me?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to answer. "Because everyone deserves to be treated like a person," he said finally. "Not property, not a thing to be bought and sold. A person." The tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks in silent streams. Jake reached out instinctively to comfort her, then stopped himself. Physical contact might not be welcome, not after what she'd been through, but Nira surprised him by leaning forward and resting her forehead against his shoulder. She didn't sob or wail, just cried quietly while Jake sat very still, afraid to move and break whatever fragile trust was building between them. "Thank you," she whispered against his shirt. "Thank you for seeing me." Learning to live in the days that followed, Jake learned that there was much more to Nira than her captors had realized. The defective Zephyrian who wouldn't respond to. Conditioning was actually a woman of remarkable intelligence and strength. She had been a teacher on Zephyr Prime before the hegemony invasion, specializing in what she called mind music, the art of using psychic abilities to create beautiful mental harmonies. The hegemony had tried to twist those same abilities into weapons to make her into a tool for psychological warfare. When she refused, they had declared her broken and tried to sell her as breeding stock. They never understood, Nira told Jake as they sat in the ship's small galley, sharing a meal of reconstituted protein and hydroponic vegetables. They thought, my abilities were like a machine they could reprogram. But creativity cannot be forced. Beauty cannot be enslaved. Jake watched her eat with small, careful bites, as if she still couldn't quite believe the food was really hers. What was it like? He asked. The mind music, I mean. Nira's eyes lit up with something Jake hadn't seen before, a spark of joy that transformed her entire face. Would you like me to show you? Jake nodded, curious despite himself. Nira set down her fork and closed her eyes, her expression becoming peaceful and concentrated. Jake felt a strange tingling sensation at the edges of his consciousness, like the beginning of a melody he couldn't quite hear. Then the music began. It wasn't sound. Not exactly, but something deeper and more primal. Jake felt harmonies resonating in his mind, complex patterns of emotion and color that seemed to paint pictures directly onto his thoughts. He saw vast landscapes of impossible beauty, crystalline cities that sang in the wind, forests of trees that grew in perfect mathematical spirals. When it ended, Jake sat in stunned silence for several minutes. That was incredible, he said finally. That was what they tried to destroy, Nira said, her voice heavy with old pain. They wanted to turn it into fear, into nightmares they could use to break their enemies. When I refused, when I held on to the beauty instead of embracing the darkness, they decided I was useless. Jake reached across the table and took her hand. Her fingers were still thin and delicate, but he could feel strength in them now, purpose. They were wrong, he said. You're not useless. You're magnificent. Nira squeezed his hand, and Jake felt a warmth that had nothing to do with her psychic abilities. I had forgotten, she said. For so long, I thought perhaps they were right. Perhaps I was broken. But when you look at me, I remember who I used to be. Over the following weeks, as Jake's ship drifted through the quieter shipping lanes, Nira began to heal in ways that went beyond the physical. The haunted look in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by curiosity and growing confidence. She explored every corner of the ship, learning how the various systems worked. Asking questions about Jake's life as a trader. In return, she shared stories of her homeworld, painting vivid pictures with her words of a society built on harmony and mutual respect. Jake found himself falling in love, not just with Nira, but with the vision of what sentient beings could be when they chose cooperation over conquest. Your people sound amazing, Jake said one evening as they watched the stars wheel by through the ship's observation port. They were, Nira replied, a note of sadness creeping into her voice. But they're scattered now, sold across the galaxy. Most have probably forgotten who they were, given up hope of ever being free again. Jake turned to look at her, seeing the pain she tried to hide. Not all of them, he said. You didn't give up. You held on to yourself, even when they tried to break you. That gives me hope for your people. Nira smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. You give me hope too, Jake Morrison. Hope that there are still good beings in this galaxy, beings who choose kindness over cruelty. She moved closer to him then, and Jake felt his breath catch as she placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. I can feel it, she said softly. "The rhythm of your thoughts, the melody of your emotions. You have a beautiful mind, Jake. Beautiful and strong and free." When she kissed him, Jake felt that same tingling sensation from her mind music, but warmer now, more intimate. It was as if she was sharing not just her lips, but her very soul, letting him feel the depth of her gratitude and growing affection. "I love you," Jake whispered against her mouth, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I love you too," Neera replied, her voice filled with wonder. "I didn't think I would ever be able to say those words again." The choice of freedom 3 months after Jake had found Neera in that terrible market, his ship received a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. Jake almost ignored it, as he'd been doing with most official communications lately. But something in the message header caught his attention. The transmission was about the Zephyrian Liberation Act, a new piece of legislation that would grant immediate freedom to any Zephyrian found in captivity, along with citizenship rights and reparations for their suffering. It was the result of years of pressure from human rights advocates and a growing coalition of species who had grown tired of the hegemony's brutal policies. "This is big," Jake told Neera as they reviewed the legal documents together. "Really big. If you register with the Council, you'll be officially free. No one can ever own you again." Neera read through the documents carefully, her expression thoughtful. "And what about you?" she asked. "What happens to us?" Jake felt his heart skip a beat. It was the question he'd been dreading, the one that kept him awake at night. Under galactic law, he was still technically Neera's owner, even though he'd never treated her as property. If she claimed her freedom through the Liberation Act, she would be free to go anywhere, do anything, be with anyone. "That's up to you," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I won't hold you back, Neera. If you want to find other Zephyrians, start a new life somewhere else, I'll understand." Neera set down the data pad and turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think I want?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "I hope not, but I want you to choose freely. Really freely, not because you feel like you owe me something." Neera was quiet for a long moment, her pale eyes studying his face. Then she smiled, that radiant expression that still took Jake's breath away. "You really don't understand, do you?" "Understand what?" "Jake Morrison," she said, taking his hands in hers. "You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me back my soul. You saw me as a person when the entire galaxy saw me as a thing. You treated me with kindness when I had forgotten what kindness felt like. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable." Jake felt tears prick at his eyes. "Neera, I choose you," she said firmly. "Not because I'm grateful, though I am. Not because I'm afraid to be alone, though I was. I choose you because you're the first person in years who has made me feel truly alive. I choose you because I love you, and because I want to spend whatever time I have left in this universe making music with you." Jake pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. "Are you sure?" he whispered into her ear. "Really sure?" "I'm sure," Neera said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "But Jake, I need you to choose too. Really choose. Not because you feel responsible for me, but because you want me here." Jake pulled back to look at her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, the fear that maybe his feelings were based on pity rather than love. "I choose you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I choose you because you're brilliant and brave and beautiful. I choose you because your mind music is the most incredible thing I've ever experienced. I choose you because you make me want to be better than I am." They registered Neera's freedom with the Galactic Council that same day, filling out the paperwork together, all docked at a council station. When the official seal appeared on the documents, declaring Neera a free citizen of the galaxy, she cried tears of joy. "It's real," she whispered, staring at the legal confirmation. "I'm really free." "You're really free," Jake confirmed, kissing her forehead. "So what do you want to do first as a free woman?" Nira grinned, an expression of pure mischief that Jake had never seen from her before. "I want to marry you, Jake Morrison, if you'll have me." Jake's answer was another kiss, deeper and more passionate than any they'd shared before. Around them, the sounds of the busy station continued, but for Jake and Nira, the rest of the galaxy had faded away. There was only them, only this moment, only the choice to love each other freely and completely. Later, as they sat in the ship's galley, sharing a bottle of real wine Jake had bought to celebrate, Nira created a mind music symphony, unlike anything she'd ever composed before. It was a song of freedom, of love, of two souls finding each other in the vast darkness of space. "What will you call it?" Jake asked when the music faded. Nira smiled, her eyes bright with happiness and hope. "I'll call it the Song of Choosing," she said, "because that's what we did, isn't it? We chose each other. We chose love over fear, hope over despair, freedom over the chains that others tried to put on us." Jake raised his wine glass in a toast. "To choosing," he said. "To choosing," Nira agreed, clinking her glass against his. "And to the music we'll make together." Outside the ship's windows, the stars shone with brilliant light, and somewhere in that vast expanse, other beings were making their own choices, their own music, their own freedom. But for Jake and Nira, this moment was enough. They had found each other, they had chosen each other, and they were free.